Hello, this is section 1.4, observation and experimental studies. So objectives for this section is explain the difference between the observational and experimental study. So there are two typical types of the statistical studies. One is observational, and the other one is experimental. So let's study for the observational study first, okay? So researcher observed what is for the observational. You need to kind of watch for the what is happening, and then what has happened in the past and draw the conclusion based on the observations. So example A is said that employees are rated as more competitive and less competitive. So researchers check the resting blood pressure and find that more competitive employees have a higher blood pressure. So the once the researcher kind of the watch out for the people who's been more competitive or less competitive, and then the people who's been more competitive have a high blood pressure because they got more stress. Experimental studies. So in an experimental study, the researcher blank one of the variable of the interest and try to determine how did the manipulation influence the other variable of the interest. So this time we need to put the researcher actually the manipulates one of the variable of the interest and try to determine how that the manipulation influences the other variable of the interest. So example B, a group of the patient diagnosed with a particular condition are randomly assigned to two groups. One group is given a traditional treatment that has been moderately successful. The second group is given a new treatment that shows a possibility of the being more successful. The doctor provides the treatment of the patient are not told which treatment they are being given. So at the end of the experiment, researcher will compare the two groups to determine if the group receiving the new treatment have better result. So that's what they wanted it, right? So they set the goals, right? So this is true that the blank study in which of the participants are assigned to the group blank, okay? So which means that this is true for the as experimental the study, but in which the participant assigned to group as must be the randomly. Another set of the example in yoga class, participants were asked to hold the position known as a plank as long as possible during two classes per week for 4 weeks. In another similar yoga class, participants were asked to increase the length of the time the position was held by 15 seconds each day. During the last class of the experiment, the average length of the time the 32 participants in the first group held the position was 4.5 minutes, while the average length of the time the 37 participants of the second group were asked to attempt to increase their time by 15 seconds. Actually, each day was 6.1 minutes. So the first group, 32 participants, has the 4.5 minutes, but second group, 37, and then they have a 6.1. So as you comparison, the second group has the staying longer. The conclusion that drawn that the group who were challenged to improve performing the better. The researcher manipulate the variable of the type of instruction given to the participant, and the yoga class chosen were intact groups. So the researcher did not have the option to random assign the class participant to each group. So making this example as a quasi experimental study. So which means that the even though they have two groups, and then the researchers have a choice to choose what group goes what and the other groups to the other. Okay. All right. So because very resembling the groups. Now we want to talk about the independent and dependent variables. So variable has being manipulated is called the independent variable or the explanatory variable. So variable or variables being measured, the result variable are called the dependent variable or outcome variables. So which means whatever you put as independent, and then the dependent variable come out just whatever results of the independent. So in example B, the independent variable is the blank and the dependent variable is this. Okay, so we're using the example B. Okay, so let's go back to example B again. So in the example B, said a group of the patient diagnosed with a particular condition are randomly assigned to two groups. One group is given traditional treatment that has been moderately successful, and the second group is given a new treatment that shows a possibility of the being more successful. The doctor providing the treatment and the patients are not told which treatment they are being given. So at the end of the experiment, researcher will compare the two groups to determine if the group receiving the new treatment has better result. This is a true experimental study in which the participants are assigned to the randomly. So in example B, the dependent variable is the treatment given to the groups of patients. And then the dependent variable means whatever the response of the patients to the treatment, which is the medical result, the result. But in example C, the independent variable is, so that's the yoga class, right? So the independent variable means the people who doing yoga has been instructions. And then the dependent variable means the whatever comes out as the instruction, which is the length of the time, participant, hold the plank positions. Okay, so treatment and the control groups. So in an experimental study, the group of which the independent variable received the manipulation is called the treatment. And then the groups for the which the independent variable not manipulated called the control group. All right, advantage and the disadvantage of the experimental study. So advantage. The participant can be assigned randomly to treatment and then control group. And the independent variable can be manipulated. But disadvantage is that they often occur in the laboratories or special classroom rather than the natural setting. So Houghton effect, a phenomenon that occurs when participant behavior changes because they are involved in an experimental study, may occur the variable known as we call the confounding or looking variable that is not being studied, so recorded or manipulated, so may actually influences to the outcome of the dependent variable. Also, the advantage, the study occurs in a the advantage and disadvantage of the observation study this time. Okay, so advantage for that observation studies is a natural setting. Experimental was not a natural setting, but observation is a natural setting. You just need to watch. This type of the study can be used when it would be unethical or the dangerous. Still manipulate the independence the variable because you just watch, right? But variables that blanked can be that cannot be, right, cannot be manipulated, such as ethnicity or left or right-handedness, and can be studied. All right, this disadvantage. So cause and effect cannot be shown, but study may be expensive because you have to wait, and then time consuming. So results are the subject to the inaccuracy due to the dependence on the who collect the data. So keep in mind that the two different studies regarding the same independent and dependent variables can be result in a different or conflicting result. That's what we want to see at the end, right? So objective, explain how the statistics can be used and misused. So statistical studies are sometimes reported in a way to sell product and do not work, prove something that the study did not address. Besides, the statistical study do not really prove anything, rather they provide evidence to support or not support the premises, or engender fear or shock or outrage. So even though the results of the statistical study are reported, does not mean that the results are the reliable. So sample may have been too. Okay, so the sample may have been too small. That's a possibility, and the subjects may not have been selected randomly, and the result may be the mis. That's another thing too, right? Interpreted. All right, so use of the poor sampling method. The sample may not be the large enough. Participants may be the volunteers, perhaps those who strong feeling for or against the premises, with a built-in bias already. So certain selection of the population, such as those who works and or elderly, may has been systematically excluded. Continuous sampling maybe has been used, such as intact classrooms, or ambiguous averages, which is you can't really tell, what it is. Okay, so several values, including the value that occur most often, the middle value of the order list, the arithmetic average or mid-range, and could be the reported as the average of or typical value. But the average then lends the most evidence in support of the researcher's position likely to be reported. Detached study. So since we have a title, right? A blank blank is one in which no comparison is made, which is detached statistic. Is the one in which no comparison is made. So 95% of the dentists recommend the brand A toothpaste. This brand is recommended instead of the what brand, or do dentists recommend several brands, including the brand A? Cookie B has been fewer calories. This cookie has fewer calories than what? They didn't say what. Then it is used to have or than another brand, but they just recommend it. So other type of the misuse, which means implied connection, use of the words such as may help, right? Misleading graph. And faculty survey question that how questions are phrased in a way that influences the way people answer them. Okay. All right. So this is all about the 1.4. So 1.4, we were talking about the observational study and then the experimental study. And then once we do those study, and then we have to say that there's an independent variable, and then when you apply that, and then you get the result, there's a dependent variables. All right, so that's what we here. So this is more likely using the terms that we use in the stat. All right, thank you for listening.